We're talking about the COVID-19 vaccines. We're going to tackle the safety of the vaccines on such a tight timeline, the known side effects of the vaccines, and we'll be taking questions from you, so get ready to ask them. Hi, I'm Missy Gleason. I'm the brand journalist with Ohio Health, and joining us is Dr. Joe Gastaldo, System Medical Director of Infectious Diseases at Ohio Health. Thanks for being here, Dr. Joe.
Missy, I'm happy to be here again.
I'm super excited. So now, before we get really started and dive into the vaccine itself, we want to get into some housekeeping items this evening. So our talk today is informational and shouldn't replace the advice of your doctor. We are wearing masks because our studio is small. We have more people in here. And so we want to make sure we are properly socially distanced and doing that. And we will work to have closed captioning up on this video replay within the next 24 hours. So if that's an issue for you, no worries. Remember to please be respectful of your fellow viewers in the comments. And we know that choosing to vaccinate or not is a personal choice. And we're talking tonight to discuss some of the questions and concerns that we are hearing about the vaccines. So before we dive into vaccine talk, we're going to get to know our expert, Dr. Joe Gastaldo. So thanks for being here yet again.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and I know this, but what makes you the guy to talk about COVID-19?
Oh gosh, that's a complicated question. You know, I almost feel like I was born for this moment. You know, growing up as a kid, I was really into science. I was one of those nerdy kids. And I think for me with COVID-19, it's a new disease, it's a new virus, and I've been very much challenged and love the idea of learning every day. So I'm listening to my podcast, I'm doing my reading, and the challenges of the daily learning and really helping to have guidance to people is something that I really feel satisfied in doing.
Awesome. So how long have you been an infectious disease doctor?
Yeah, so I finished my training at Ohio State, and I have been an infectious disease doctor here at Riverside since 2002. So I've been here for a while. I've been very privileged and honored to be a member of the medical staff here. And people know me. I've been around. I'm a very social person, and that's always been my brand, to really get to know physicians and my patients.
Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into today's news, because a lot has happened today on the vaccine front. So what can you tell us about what happened today?
Yeah, so today really was an historic day in the whole story of COVID-19. And what happened today was the FDA approval under emergency use authorization for the Pfizer BioNTech messenger RNA vaccine. Now, we are the third Western country to approve it. Canada approved it yesterday. A few days ago, the United Kingdom approved it. And that, for what's going on with COVID-19, that is a ray of sunshine. And it's something really to be celebrated. And it's our first baby step and in getting back to a long journey of getting us back to a pre-COVID way of life.
So today we had that meeting, and what is next? Like, what are the next steps?
Yeah, so the meeting that happened today was a subgroup within the FDA. And when you look at who was sitting at the table virtually, it's a who's who of experts in their fields when it comes to infectious diseases vaccines. They make a recommendation for or against. They approved it, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's non-binding, so meaning that it goes to the leadership within the FDA, and they will hopefully give the approval and the recommendation. So after that, that's going to set the stage in place for a lot of things to happen. It's going to go to the CDC. There's a subgroup within the CDC which will leave the recommendations for the vaccine. And then in the very near future, tentatively in Ohio, probably maybe on the 14th or 15th of December, we will have our first delivery of a very limited amount of this specific vaccine.
And there's more than one vaccine right now in development, correct?
Yeah, so what's happening right now, we have two messenger RNA vaccines. One was approved today by Pfizer. A week from today, next Thursday, there is another messenger RNA vaccine made by the company Moderna. They're going to be reviewed by the FDA's committee, just like was done today. And hopefully by this time next week, we'll have two vaccines that are approved. In addition to that, there are at least 4 other vaccines that are going to be in phase 3 trials or soon to be. We have vaccines being made by AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax, and another company. So there are more vaccines. We need more vaccines. We need enough vaccines to immunize, hopefully, at least all the Americans we have. In our country, we roughly have 320 million people. So I'm hopeful that at least by summer of 2021, we will have enough vaccines available, by more than likely more than one vaccine, to immunize all Americans.
Awesome. So how effective are these vaccines?
Yeah, so what they studied in the vaccines were symptomatic COVID-19. So let's talk about the Pfizer vaccine, the one that got approved today. They roughly had 43,000 people. Half the people got the vaccine, half the people got the placebo. What they were measuring was people who got sick with the virus. They had symptomatic COVID-19. And what they found was, out of 170 people who had symptomatic COVID-19, the vast majority of them, 95% of them, were people who got the placebo. So that's how they got the 95% efficacy.
Gotcha. So we have a question from one of our viewers. They are asking, when will we know how often we have to get the vaccine?
That's a great question. Sometime in 2021. One of the things that the studies did not do was determine how long the immunity lasts. So the study trials and the science are still happening. That question we will get an answer to sometime in 2021. Now, we know that when you get immunity from the virus, from the natural infection, that immunity doesn't last forever. At best, it lasts for maybe 6 or 7 months. And that's probably how the vaccines are going to perform. So I think when it's all said and done, we will require some type of booster for this vaccine.
All right. So who is set to get the vaccine first?
Yeah, so we have guidelines that were put out by the National Academy of Science, and also the guidelines will come out for prioritization. So when it comes to the priorities, the first priority are those who have died the most from COVID-19, and those are nursing home patients. So one priority are nursing home patients, and the second priority are healthcare workers who really are involved in taking care of COVID-19 patients, or healthcare workers involved in the front lines, like those who work in the emergency department or urgent care.
Talking about people who will get the vaccine, I wanted to ask about specifically pregnant women or women who are trying to conceive. Should they be getting the vaccine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the one thing that we have to call out up front is to say that pregnant women and children under the age of 18 were not in the studies. So the FDA approval that came out, that was not approved for pregnant women. And I doubt that the CDC will recommend it for pregnant women. So what's going to happen, like I say it probably a couple times today, the science continues. I feel confident in saying that as 2021 comes along, they'll do what's called bridge studies, and hopefully we'll have an answer to that on the safety in pregnant women.
Gotcha. So will the vaccine definitively stop someone from getting COVID-19, or will it lessen it?
That's a great question. So what's measured in the vaccine, the primary endpoint, or what they were really looking at, was people getting sick symptomatically. So we're all used to PCR testing. Half the people get the vaccine, half the people get the placebo, and they say, you know what, go live your life and call us if you get sick. They're not doing daily PCR tests on people. They were only measuring people who became sick and then tested positive for the virus.
Okay, this is a question I'm sure a lot of people wonder. If they do get the vaccine, do they still need to wear a mask?
For the time being, yes. The mitigation strategies that we have in public, even within Ohio Health, they're going to be here for a while. It's going to take public health, the CDC, and the people in science to determine what that herd immunity looks like. Now, what I think is going to happen as more and more Americans get vaccinated, knowing that the vaccines prevent people from getting sick, prevent people from going into the hospital, prevent people from dying, we will see the deaths go down, we will see hospitalizations go down, and we will see ICU admissions go down. So those are things that we will see as more and more Americans get vaccinated.
Awesome. So moving on to side effects, what are the side effects of the vaccine?
Yeah, so let's talk about side effects. For the most part, the vaccines are very well tolerated. There's a difference between side effects and adverse drug reactions. Let's talk about side effects first. The side effects that were most reported from the Pfizer study are things like pain at the injection site, maybe a low-grade temperature elevation, fatigue, headache, more or less what I describe as being off kilter for 24 hours. And really what's going on, when you get the vaccine, you're getting an immune response. That's your body's way of recognizing the vaccine and starting that building of immunity. So we want people to know that. So if you were getting a vaccine today, Missy, I'd say, you know what, Missy, you're going to get a vaccine and you may feel off kilter for 24 hours. I want you to know that you may have pain at your site, you may feel out of it, you may have fatigue or a headache or a low-grade temperature for 24 hours.
That's good to know. I got a question from one of our viewers. They're asking if you get the vaccine or if folks in nursing homes get the vaccine, how soon can we feel safe to visit them?
That's a great question. Again, the mitigation strategies are here for a while. They're not going anywhere. So once you get people vaccinated in the nursing home, when you still go in to see them, you're still going to be wearing masks for a while.
Gotcha. So back to side effects and how you might feel after it. I wanted to ask you today about Pfizer's allergy warning and what we should know about that.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. What happened yesterday in the United Kingdom? You had 2 individuals who carried EpiPens. Those are things that we give to people when they have a very, very serious allergy called anaphylaxis. So these were 2 known people who had a history of very severe allergies, and they received the vaccination and had a severe allergic reaction which responded to their EpiPens. As we begin to vaccinate millions and millions of people, we know that there are people out there who are very sensitive and have severe allergies to things. So they talked about this today on the CDC call. Throughout 2021, the science is going to continue. We're going to monitor for that. We're going to study for that and see if we can learn for that and try to protect people who may have severe allergies.
And so part of getting the vaccine is also keeping track of the people who got it and any possible adverse reactions.
That's correct. You know, in the background of the vaccines is a lot of safety surveillance communications. One thing that I think the CDC did that's really cool is when you get the vaccine, you're going to be asked voluntarily to download a smartphone app called V-Safe. If you choose to download the app after you get vaccinated, you'll get questions from the CDC. Hey, how are you feeling? And it also allows you to report to them any side effects that you may be experiencing.
That's great. And that will kind of lead us right into the trials and the approval process, because I know there's tons of questions about how fast this happened. So can you explain Operation Warp Speed?
Yeah, so we are at a world war against a virus. And it really, I think when history talks about COVID-19, it'll put us up there like with World War I and World War II. But we're at a world war against a virus, recognizing that there are people dying, people being very sick, and that we are hurting as a world and as a country. We had to do things in a much more efficient way without compromising any of the integrity of the science or the safety. So Operation Warp Speed was a mechanism that allowed everything to be done in a much more efficient way. It also financially supported companies to make the vaccines, because there's not a lot of money to be made in vaccines, and companies are very conservative in investing money into the vaccines. So something that Operation Warp Speed did that I thought was kind of cool, they went to the companies like Moderna, and they said, hey Moderna, make the vaccine, make up doses ahead of time so we have them, but we still want you to do your study. Operation Warp Speed also had an emphasis on the scientific integrity and the safety. The studies that were done for these vaccines are done the exact same way that we have done for traditional vaccines, and the way that they are reviewed and the way they are evaluated by 3 different independent groups: the Data Safety Monitoring Board, an independent group within the FDA, and an independent group within the CDC. That's exactly the same way that we've done with previous vaccines.
So while it feels really fast, it's very efficient.
It feels very fast. It's very efficient too, but also it was really, you know, we're in the 21st century now. We have technologies when it comes to medicines and vaccines that were all aligned to be ready to be teed up to be used today. We have some of the newer generation vaccines already out now. There's a new shingles vaccine out called Shingrix, and a new hepatitis B vaccine out that are newer generation vaccines that just came online recently last couple years.
That's good to know. So when we talk about the testing groups, do you know how big those testing groups were?
Yeah, I sure do. The Pfizer study had a total of 43,000 people in it. Half the people got the vaccine, half the people got the placebo. And there's complete transparency on the types of people in the vaccines. They were committed to having a very diverse background in the vaccines. And they had roughly 70% of the people who were in the trial were from the United States. Other people were from around the world. And they really had a robust effort in having a very diverse group in that category.
Good to know. So what about the possible long-term effects of the vaccine? Do we have any inkling of what that could be, or is it just we're going to watch?
Well, we're going to watch, obviously. The science still continues. What we do know is that the vaccines are safe. There have been no serious adverse drug reactions noted from the messenger RNA vaccine trials. And again, when we talk about vaccines, we have to be very, very humble. The vaccines were well tolerated. There were no safety concerns on the studies, and we have data now from at least 2 months plus from people who have received the vaccines.
We have a viewer question. So someone is asking about what the vaccine is composed of that could cause an allergic reaction. So is there like eggs, or is there latex, or anything that people, like if you're allergic to this, you shouldn't take the vaccine?
That's a great question. I'm glad that someone asked that. So the messenger RNA vaccine, if anybody wants to know, look it up on the FDA. They'll tell you exactly everything that's in it. What I think people are having an allergic reaction to is what the messenger RNA is surrounded by. It's surrounded by a little piece of fat or lipid. They call it a lipid nanoparticle. And I think that's what people could potentially have an allergic reaction to, is that lipid component. And again, assuming that is the case, it did not happen in any of the 43,000 people in the study.
Okay, another very smart viewer question. Do we know anything about asymptomatic virus transmission from vaccinated people?
That's a great question. That was not studied in the vaccine. The only thing that they measured in the vaccine for their endpoint was symptomatic COVID-19. If you got sick, they said, hey, call us, let's do a PCR on you. They did not do PCR testing. Now, one of the studies, the AstraZeneca study, their primary endpoint too was also symptomatic COVID-19, but there were a lot of people in their study who had weekly PCR tests done. So once we get more clarity on those results, that's one thing I'll specifically be looking at. Now, they talked about that today at the FDA meeting. And, you know, we could still study that moving forward as people get vaccinated. So I have a hunch that there's going to be more information throughout 2021 on that topic.
So since there are other vaccines that are in development, do they sound like they're a little bit different, or are they kind of all following the same pattern, the same delivery and everything?
Yeah, they're all following the same pattern. The messenger RNA vaccines first came to fruition because those started first. Now, the ones that started later, like the AstraZeneca one, and then the newer ones, Johnson & Johnson and Novavax, those studies are filling up quickly because there's a lot of COVID-19 going on. And gratefully enough, we've had a lot of volunteers in our country sign up for the trial. So those will come online eventually. And I expect AstraZeneca's to be reviewed sometime in January, maybe February by the FDA, followed closely by Johnson & Johnson and then Novavax.
Okay, I have a personal question for you. Are you planning to get the vaccine?
Yes, absolutely. When there is a vaccine that is FDA approved and CDC recommended, and I get my right place in line and I get that call, I will happily roll up my sleeve, receive the vaccine. I will recommend it for my parents, my friends, my loved ones, and most importantly for my patients.
I have one more viewer question here. So somebody is asking about the booster. Does it need to be given on an exact day, or is there a window of time to get your booster?
Yeah, so when it comes, let me answer that in two ways. I think the first way, let's talk about the second dose. So the messenger RNA vaccine is the second dose. For my discussions and being on some CDC calls, what's written in the way it's approved is you get the second dose after 21 days, but I think the recommendations are going to allow a little grace maybe of 1 or 2 days. When it comes to getting a booster sometime in the future, we don't know when that booster is going to be given. Is it going to be every year, every other year? We just don't know, and that's why we have to allow the science to continue in trying to answer that.
Good deal. Just a reminder, today we're talking with Dr. Joe Gastaldo, infectious disease doc with Ohio Health, and we are taking your questions live about the COVID-19 vaccine. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box, and we have folks monitoring to get them here to us. I have a couple more for you. So can somebody call their doctor today and get on a list for the vaccine?
Unfortunately, not yet. So when we first get the vaccines in our community in the state, they are going to be designated for people who live in nursing homes and for healthcare workers. That's going to be a while. I'm very, very optimistic that as each new month and every new week gets here in 2021, there will be a time, maybe in the spring or summer, where people can go to their local retail pharmacy and get vaccinated. We'll get there. We have to ask for everybody to be patient.
That makes sense. So if a friend gets the vaccine, I know we kind of touched on this earlier too, is it safer to hang around them, or would you still suggest that people kind of stay apart?
You should still practice the mitigation strategies until we have an idea of what's going on in the community. You know, for us to get to any kind of herd immunity, it really involves getting vaccinations out for a lot of people, and we're not going to be there yet. So the recommendations on wearing masks, physical distancing, they're going to be here for a while, at least through most of 2021.
So getting the vaccine is a great step, but we still need to be safe.
Correct, absolutely.
Okay. So I have a viewer question that says, I have a friend who got COVID. Do we have less of a risk of sharing COVID between us, or can they get sick again?
Great question. So this is what we know. Remember, it's a new virus. We're almost on the 1-year mark of when this virus was first recognized. What I think is going to happen, and it's happening a little bit more and more, is we are seeing people who are getting infection again with the same virus, indicating that they do lose some immunity over time. So back to the question that you have is, when you get infection with the virus, we don't know how long your immunity lasts for. That's why if you've had COVID 4 or 5 months ago, you could quite possibly be in a scenario where you get infection again.
Okay. A question from a viewer is this a live vaccine?
It is not a live vaccine. It's
Okay.
a great question. It's not a live vaccine. None of the vaccines that are in phase 3 trials right now in North America are live viruses. And the messenger RNA vaccine does not change your genetic material. It does not become part of your cellular DNA. The RNA that you're injected with over time does degrade.
Okay. I'm looking through our questions. Are there any differences between the vaccines right now that are in development?
Yeah, they're all different. They're all different. They're not interchangeable. Mechanistically, the messenger RNA vaccines work the same, but they're not interchangeable. It's kind of like when it comes to race cars. I have a Mustang and you have a Camaro. They kind of do the same thing. They're both sports cars. But therapeutically, the way the two messenger RNA vaccines work are exactly the same way, but they are different.
Okay. A question from another viewer, will the first wave of those vaccinated still be protected while others get their vaccine later? So I'm guessing this is asking about how long the immunity lasts.
So again, the science continues. Mm-hmm. When you get vaccinated with the vaccine, you will have immunity, pretty good immunity, for at least, if I had to say, maybe 6 to 12 months. Again, as 2021 comes along, that particular question is being evaluated, and it's being studied in the trials that are still going on that's happening.
So it feels like, for me as a layperson, the understanding is that the vaccines are safe. And yes, we know you'll get it and you won't really there's not big adverse reactions that have been tracked so far. But what we're still trying to figure out is how long you will stay immune.
Correct.
And so that's why our mitigation strategies are important, staying socially distanced, wearing our masks, washing our hands, all of those things worked. And I've learned this from you, synergistically together to keep us all safe, correct?
You said it better than I did.
I've learned. All right. Checking to see if we've got another question. We've got one coming through right now, and I'm going to flip back through here and see if there's anything else that we have. So knowing that somebody can possibly get sick again, thinking through, knowing that we're going to have like boosters, or we're going to look at possibly getting a flu shot again, is this something that you will anticipate in the future, that when you go in for your flu shot, you'll get a COVID vaccine too?
The simple answer to that is yes.
Okay.
In fact, Novavax, one of the companies I talked about before, they are working on a COVID-19 vaccine by itself. But guess what, Missy? They're also studying a combined influenza COVID-19 vaccine. So I think someday we will require boosters. And I know companies now are investigating making a combined influenza COVID vaccination.
Okay. Why does one of the vaccines need to be stored in sub-zero temperatures?
Another great question. So the messenger RNA vaccines, they're very fragile. They're very fragile means that they can be damaged, and once they're damaged, they're not efficacious. They don't work that well. So once the vaccines are made, they're very fragile. They have to be frozen. The Pfizer vaccine has to be frozen at minus 75 degrees Celsius. That requires dry ice. The Moderna vaccine is frozen in a normal pharmacy-grade freezer. And then once the vaccines are taken out and put in the refrigerator, you have to use them with a specified amount of time.
So don't miss your appointment for your
Don't
vaccine.
miss your appointment. Don't miss your appointment. We don't want to waste any vaccines, obviously.
So here's a question. If you are allergic from the flu vaccine, should you try the COVID vaccine, or are they similar?
They're different. They're different vaccines. If somebody had an allergy to a flu vaccine, I'd want to know a little bit more information. What exactly is that allergy? And if you do have a serious type of allergy like anaphylaxis, do you know exactly what it is that you are caused an anaphylaxis, to kind of see if that ingredient is in the COVID-19 vaccine?
And we have another viewer question. I know we touched on this right at the very beginning, but they are asking, will children be vaccinated?
At this point in time, no. The approval that happened today did not include children. However, I think we will have more clarity on that, and hopefully we will have the FDA approval for children to get it sometime in 2021.
And so let's go back and visit pregnant women really quickly.
Same thing for pregnant women. So pregnant women were not included in any of the study. But as I said before, between both studies, you have close to 75,000 people in it, Missy. And I can promise you, there are women of childbearing years who received the vaccine, who became pregnant. And guess what? They're going to follow those women along, and they're going to do what's called a bridge analysis for both pregnant women and pediatric patients. And I'm optimistic that we will get there sometime in 2021. We want to do it knowing that it's safe. We don't want to cut any corners at all. I want everyone to be vaccinated, but I want to make sure that's done in a safe way. As we get more vaccines that come out, we may realize that some vaccines work better in different populations. Like for flu, we have some flu vaccines that we know work better in people above the age of 65. We didn't know that many years ago. That's relatively new. And as we learn more information with the different types of vaccines, those are the types of things we're looking for.
So when they're testing the vaccines, how are they making sure they have diverse populations to see how they react?
So I didn't really get in the weeds that much, but when you have a vaccine trial, you want to have a diverse group. You don't want to have all men or all women. You don't want to have all Hispanic. You want to make it as diverse as possible. So really, when you look at the people who get COVID-19, they could tell you, for example, how many were men, how many from women, how many from minority communities. And when they gather all that information, they could really tell, hey, this vaccine, there are signals that this vaccine works better in this population versus another population.
We have a viewer question about the trials in particular, asking about why would a trial be paused, and what would have those, or if you recall, what were the issues were?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So the Data Safety Monitoring Board is an independent group of professionals, statisticians, scientists. They are the ones that constantly exchange with the study information that goes on. If there is a side effect that rises up that they think is an adverse reaction from the vaccine, legally they could pause the vaccine study. There were no pauses at all for the Pfizer and Moderna studies, which are done. There were pauses for AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. If a pause exists, only the FDA could lift that pause, because they really need to take the time to investigate to say, hey, is that adverse reaction potentially from the vaccine? So what happened in the United Kingdom was that there was a patient who they thought developed a hyperimmune response, a condition called transverse myelitis. After further investigating that, the FDA here determined that that outcome was not related to the vaccine. And a similar type scenario occurred with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Pauses shouldn't scare anybody. They happen all the time. We do the same types of studies for things like antibiotics, birth control pills, high blood pressure medications. There's always a data safety monitoring board there, and many times pauses happen. We want that to happen because we want to investigate things to make sure that they're not related to the medication the person received or the vaccine.
Gotcha. This is a really interesting viewer question. This person said they are tested for COVID twice a week at work. So will they test positive when they get the vaccine?
That's a great question. And the simple answer to that is no.
Okay.
You getting a COVID vaccine will not have anything to do at all with you having a positive or detectable test. The person who gets tested on a regular basis at work, my hunch is it's an antigen test, because that's the one that is done regularly at work on a regular basis. And with an antigen test or a PCR test, getting the vaccine will not make those tests positive.
Okay. Somebody is asking about the Pfizer vaccine. They said it seemed to be temperamental with how cold it does need to be. And what would happen if you received it when the temperature was potentially off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we call that the cold chain. There is so much infrastructure in place to make sure that the vaccine is at the right temperature. You're required to take the temperature many times during the day to ensure that it's at that critical storage temperature. Also, too, once it's put in the refrigerator, in the pharmacy world, when it comes to vaccines, they're required to take the temperature of the refrigerator on a regular basis. Now, if the situation arises where the vaccine is not, let's say the temperature is too warm in the freezer or in the refrigerator, the vaccine potency can be compromised, meaning that you may not have the same immune response to it. Instead of getting a full dose, it may be a half a dose or a third a dose. That's why making sure and ensuring that the vaccine is stored properly is very, very important.
We have another viewer question asking about if you can discuss the waiting period to be sure things like Guillain-Barré don't develop.
That's a great question, and yeah, I can address that. So when people get hyperimmune conditions like Guillain-Barré, transverse myelitis, and other ones, when it comes to vaccines, those always occur within a 6-week period. So what the FDA commissioner did was said that after the vaccines were done enrolling people, there was an automatic 8-week pause to see if there was any of those hyperimmune responses that occurred. And those did not occur at all with any of the messenger RNA vaccines. And again, those are seen more so with live viruses or things that are grown in viral cultures. My hunch is that I wouldn't expect to see them as much with these newer generation vaccines. However, nonetheless, the layer of protection investigating that was the 8-week pause that occurred after people were being enrolled. Those types of hyperimmune conditions occur always within 6 weeks.
Gotcha. So here's a great question. Why do we give placebo vaccines?
That's a great question. Well, we have to. You know what? When we measure things like side effects, some of the side effects that we measure are very subjective, like fatigue. Fatigue may mean something different to you than it does to me. Same thing for like headache. So when people get enrolled in a trial, we had to give a placebo to get a true measure of what that is. And when you look at some of the side effects from the Pfizer trial, one of the side effects is fatigue. I think roughly, if I remember, about 30% of people who got the vaccine complained of fatigue. But guess what? 30% of the people who got the placebo also complained of fatigue too. So it really tries to allow us to investigate a complaint. So a great example of that, let's say hypothetically, people who had the Pfizer vaccine, 80% of them got a headache, and 0% of them in placebo got the headache. So again, we had to have a placebo in there to really try to figure out if the side effect is from the vaccine or not.
So is there typically a traditional ratio of vaccine to placebo?
Yeah, it's always 50-50. And again, that's what a randomized controlled trial is, that half the people get vaccine, half the people get placebo, and those administering the vaccine don't know who's getting what. It's blinded both to the recipient and the giver.
Okay. A viewer question is, after your first dose, is your second dose set aside for you? And what if none are available 20-something days later?
That's a great question. So right now, this is what the federal government has told us. When we get our approximately 98,000 doses next week, we were told by the federal government to use them up, give them to 98,000 people in nursing homes and healthcare. And at approximately 21 days later, we will get another 98,000 doses to give to those people. So we're not, if we get 500 doses, we're giving 500 vaccines out. We're not giving them to 250 people and saving 250 doses for a couple weeks later.
If you have COVID now, how long would you need to wait to get the vaccine?
That's a great question. So if you actually have COVID now, we would want you to recover from COVID and get out of your isolation before you get the vaccine. When people are sick with a fever, they already have immune stimulation going on. We really want them to get over that first. When it comes to flu shots or other vaccinations that we get, if people have a high fever or if they're sick for whatever reason, we really want them to be over that first.
That's why you get asked if you have any
Correct.
flu symptoms.
Correct.
Are the first and second doses the same?
Yes, they are. The
Okay.
first and second doses are the same, but one thing that's very important to know is Pfizer, Moderna, they're both messenger RNA vaccines. They're not identical. They're both 2 doses, so if your first shot is Pfizer, your second shot is Pfizer. You can't switch over to the other vaccine.
You honestly just answered the next question that popped up for us. So I see that we've got another question coming through. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh gosh, Missy,
I
I could talk for hours on this stuff. And again, I think it's important for people to understand. I feel quite confident in the types of trials that were set up. I feel very confident in the review process at the level of the FDA that happened today and what's going to happen at the CDC. The science continues. These are great questions. As 2021 comes along, we're still going to learn a lot about this virus, COVID-19, and the vaccines. I feel confident in saying that as more people get vaccinated, fewer people will get sick, fewer people will become hospitalized, and fewer people will die from this virus. When you look at the overall deaths in our country, our death numbers are going up, as are our positivity numbers, and that's what makes me sad as a country. We're at a war, people are dying, and these vaccines will save lives. And this is really, I think, a turning point for where we are in this COVID-19 journey.
One more question from a viewer. Will we have a choice about which brand vaccine we get?
So, great question. So my hunch is the CDC, who does give the recommendations, is not going to recommend one vaccine over the other initially. As the science comes out, they may realize, hey, this vaccine works better in those above the age of 65. Look at the flu shots. There are over 5 different types of flu vaccinations that are out there. The CDC does not recommend one flu vaccine over the other.
Okay. Can you get the COVID vaccine at the same time as other vaccines that you are due for example, the flu shot?
Yeah, so I can't honestly answer that because we don't know. Okay. The next step is it's going to go to the CDC, and they will leave final recommendations answering questions like that. Now, my hunch is probably yes. However, given the fact that this is a new vaccine and we want to do everything we can to be extra cautious, they're probably going to recommend, no, don't do that. So again, let's wait to see what the CDC says.
Okay. Will the vaccine evolve to eventually be like the flu vaccine, where we are guessing at what strains it needs to be?
Potentially. So, you know, the fact that this coronavirus changes, and it has changed, it's going to happen. But the immune response, specifically the spike protein, is what we respond to immunologically. That part hasn't changed. So at this point in time, it doesn't look like that's the case. Hypothetically, if the spike protein changes to a point, we could have to change the vaccine to a different type of messenger RNA. Again, the science continues, and we will all learn together.
So this is another question I think you might give the same answer to, but does the virus mutate?
The virus does change. Now, again, I don't want to say the word mutate because that kind of brings in things from science fiction movies. Viruses change. Influenza changes every year. Coronavirus changes, and this virus has changed since it first came on the scene about a year ago. Immunologically, the way we recognize it in our body, that part hasn't changed. The way we develop an immune response, that part hasn't changed because the spike protein hasn't changed. Now, if the spike protein changes enough in the future, we'll know that, and we'll have to change the vaccine accordingly.
Do you know if the vaccine has been tested on people with epilepsy?
I don't know. They did not call out epilepsy in the Pfizer study. They called out conditions like obesity, diabetes, lung disease. Epilepsy was not one of the things that I saw in my review. Now, we'll see what the ACIP says. They might have comments on that, but I did not see a specific call out for seizure disorders.
Okay. Another viewer question, do you think the Bell's palsy reaction in the trial participants was related to the vaccine?
Well, they talked about that today on the FDA meeting. So tentatively, the answer to that is no. It was not plausible that the Bell's palsy was from the vaccine. However, I'm very humble in recognizing that we will learn that. As we start vaccinating, instead of roughly 43,000 people, once we start vaccinating 98,000 people in Ohio, we will follow that and see if that association is there. For those who did develop Bell's palsy, some of them have had the Bell's palsy resolved and they're getting better.
Okay. One more question here. They're coming in now. Do we know anything about a common link for people who tend to get a more severe reaction to COVID-19?
Yeah, there's a lot of things speculative about that. So with the virus, one of the things that was being talked about in the scientific community is your inoculum, meaning that how much virus you get exposed to. So that's been described quite well with other infectious diseases, meaning that if I'm not wearing a mask and someone has COVID and I get a huge amount of it exposed to me, I'm going to get sicker versus only being exposed to a smaller amount of the virus. So that's one thing that's being speculated and being studied. Other things that are being studied are vitamin D, for example. There is a clear association of having severe COVID-19 and being lower in your vitamin D levels. I'm not telling anybody to take vitamin D. If anybody wants to take vitamin D, my advice would be to go to your doctor, talk to them about it, or your provider, and see if that's appropriate for you. Vitamin D, if you take too much of it, can make you very sick. So I'm not wanting anybody to take a lot of vitamin D. Talk to your healthcare provider about it. So again, how much you get exposed to and your vitamin D deficiency if you have that. Those are some things. And there's a couple other things out there that may explain why some people get more sick than others when it comes to this virus.
Okay, final question. So now that the vaccine is coming through, we know that it's going to be starting to be given out at for healthcare workers and then for people who work with nursing homes or in nursing homes. Do we know where it'll be given out? Will it start at hospitals and then kind of branch out from there?
Yeah, it will. So as time goes on, there will be much more clarity on that. I feel confident in saying that, coming through the governor's office and the Ohio Department of Health. So what's going to happen initially is there's going to be vaccine prioritization for those who work in hospitals, for frontline responders like police officers and firefighters, and nursing home residents. After we feel confident that we have enough vaccines and we start that process, then it's going to be rolled out to people who are elderly, those with medical conditions. Phase 2 has K through 12 teachers, frontline workers, but there's a process in place, and we will be going through that process. And as we get through there, I feel quite confident in saying the Ohio Department of Health will announce to us through the news and provide clarity on that.
All right. Final thoughts?
Final thoughts is I'm so happy to talk about the vaccine. This really is a shimmer of sunshine. You know, these next few months and weeks are going to be the most challenging time for us for COVID. And, you know, I've been doing nothing but COVID-related stuff since January, and I want to talk about something different that's going to get us to the end of this journey. We'll get there, but it's going to take time, and we need people to stay on point with mitigation strategies and look forward to getting the vaccine. We need to talk about the vaccine respectfully to everybody. Vaccine hesitancy is out there. And vaccine hesitancy, a lot of it has to do with people not understanding the science and the rigorous process of the review. And I want to talk to those people. We need to have conversations, and we need to specifically have conversations with everybody in every community. We need medical leaders, we need business leaders, we need church leaders. I'm not the appropriate person to go to a synagogue to talk to. I'm not the appropriate person to speak to an African American community. We need leaders from all communities to go to their communities to talk about the vaccine.
Thank you, and we truly appreciate you taking the time tonight. So thank you for joining us too. If you want to dig a little deeper into the topics we covered today, you can find this information on our COVID-19 toolkit on the Ohio Health Wellness blog. Just go to ohiohealth.com and click on Health and Wellness and then Wellness blog. Until next time, thanks for joining us.